So welcome, my name is Diana LeBeau, and I am going to talk to you all a little bit about some of the principles and practices that undergird innovation pathways in general and will be critical to composing a strong application for Part A and beyond, not to mention setting up a strong program at your respective schools. One thing I will share is we are really creating a workshop experience today that is predominantly aimed at those of you who are currently working on completing a Part A application. And so for those of you who are completing an application for a new pathway because you already have an established pathway or are here with a pathway and implementation right now, you're absolutely welcome, but some of these pieces might feel a little bit like review for you, and that's okay. Maybe you can be able to offer your expertise in some of our breakout sessions later this morning. So I want to start by introducing the 5 guiding principles of innovation pathways. I won't review them in detail. We've done that in some other prior workshops, and we have extensive information available on them within our website, our technical assistance website, and the DESE website for innovation pathways. But what I will share is that they are really important and critical to every aspect of designing your pathway. And what you will find this morning is we'll get a chance to dive into these a little bit more deeply. At this point, if you're in the middle of completing your application, I imagine you've started really thinking about how to authentically embed each of these guiding principles in your work. And with that, I want you all to share with me which ones feel a little challenging or difficult for you to be doing well as you're putting together your application. So you should have a poll that popped up on your screens, and I'll give you just a minute to complete that. Give you a few more seconds. It looks like just over half of you have voted so far. All right, so last call for any votes on this. And I will share out what we're seeing from the results. So it looks like just over half of you, the majority of you actually find that effective partnerships is a challenge in this design process. Making it even more special that we are joined by a few folks from Mass Hire today who can really help facilitate some of those strong partnerships. And we'll talk a little bit more about some ways to enhance this particular aspect later on today, but I will say this is something that fortunately there's a lot of help on. Equitable access and guided academic pathways, as well as connection to career came up for some of you. And we will, again, touch on some of these later. Actually, we're going to have the opportunity to do some breakout groups to discuss some of the various challenges you all are experiencing. But I would say, regardless, that we can be resources to you, and we'll be sharing with you later some top resources to go to that might also help you in addition to some of the people we can make sure to connect you with today and beyond. All right. The other piece that we wanted to make sure everybody keeps in mind as you're designing your Part A applications and your programs in general are the core characteristics of high quality college and career pathways. These are the pieces that are really the design elements that you're putting into your application and also into your design for a strong program. And All together, these 6 pieces really comprise a strong program. The 5 guiding principles mentioned earlier should be integrated into each of these core characteristics. I won't review each of them right now in particular. Again, we have tools that will support you with them, and later on today, when you're diving into thinking about different aspects of the design process, these will naturally come up as part of the conversation, and we can continue to be resources for you when we get to the Q&A part later today.
Diana, while you're switching, I just want to note that it looks like an accidental sort of drawing tool was used on the screen. And so there's some red marks on the screen there, but please just, for those watching, don't pay attention to those. We'll clear those away if we're able.
Thank you. I might have clicked an annotation tool or something. All right, looks like I fixed it. Sorry for that. All right, so I want to share with you all a couple of things that are really important to have sort of at the handy. My colleague just chatted to you all the link to our Innovation Pathways Toolkit. And this toolkit, which is on our technical assistance website, will contain a lot of the things we'll talk about today, as well as additional tools that will be really supportive to you during the design process and beyond, long into implementation. So please bookmark this toolkit, and there's an annotated index that will allow you to figure out which tools might best meet the needs that you have. We've designed this not to be something you read from cover to cover, but something that can be an ongoing reference to you throughout your process of design and implementation of your innovation pathways. In terms of the toolkit, it contains 4 key sections. One of those sections is simply an overview of the context for innovation pathways, that guiding principles, as well as some of the important other elements to keep in mind. The core design elements section really contains resources developed here in Massachusetts, specifically by colleagues at DESE to support your planning and design of some of the required pathways elements. These will be a fantastic resource for you as you're trying to envision some best practices for pieces that you're building out. Section 3 has tools to support each step of the Innovation Pathways design process. We recommend this 4-step process to really help you build a pathway that is robust, but also to have a process that's really supportive of eventually strong implementation. And finally, there's a section chock full of resources for you on every topic related to innovation pathways. That design cycle that I mentioned before is depicted here. This is in section 3. And right now, I imagine most of you who are here are actively working on the designing and planning phase, which is the 3rd part of this cycle. Hopefully, you've already had the opportunity to stop, take stock, and both build a vision with colleagues and other stakeholders, students, maybe even family and community members, and certainly with some potential partners at MassHire and in industry. If you haven't, I strongly recommend interweaving that with your design phase right now. Similarly, the Understanding Your Community section is really about gathering data on what the needs are, gathering data on the demands of industry here in Massachusetts and across the region, and thinking about what will work in your school context with your school community and your students. Again, in an ideal world, that happens at the earliest stages, but if it hasn't happened yet, this is something that can be interwoven throughout the design process, and could it take the shape of bringing on some additional stakeholders as you begin to really make your design robust. So there's 4 different things I wanted to specifically draw your attention to within the toolkit. The first I already mentioned is that whole section 2, which is core design elements, which contains some Massachusetts specific resources on innovation pathways and is an important reference point for any of your design work. But beyond that, there's 3 tools that are newly developed by myself and my colleagues that should be supportive of you throughout the stage you're currently at right now. One of those is an Innovation Pathways criteria planning tool focused on preliminary criteria. This is really something that you can pull out in meetings with your team and actually sort of check boxes. Have we done this piece? Have we attended to this sufficiently? What are some action steps that we need to take to finish completing our application in a successful way? There's also its twin, or its partner, I should say, for the Part B application. So if you're mostly done with the Part A application and this isn't going to be as useful to you now, it might still be really useful for you to use the one for the later criteria for Part B. We also have 2 other newly developed tools, and one of them is the self-assessment tool that you can really use later when you're implementing to determine how things are working, do some progress monitoring, and really assess how implementation is going. It's meant to be a self-assessment done at the school or district level to make sure that you have all of your ducks in a row to be best supporting the positive outcomes for your students. But this is also really useful at this earlier stage as a way to do backwards planning, to envision where you want to go to so that you can make sure that you're lining up your structures and supports in such a way that will help you achieve those positive outcomes later. Finally, there is a design and implementation reflection tool, and we will be diving into this a lot more later today. So you're actually going to get a chance today to play with 2 of these tools. One of them is that preliminary criteria planning tool, which I will pass it over to my colleague in a couple of minutes to talk about. And finally, later on in breakouts, you're going to be doing some work with a reflection tool to help dive into some of the adaptive challenges that come up during the design process. With that, I will turn it over to my colleague, Callie, to continue sharing and to dive into that Innovation Pathways Part A application tool.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Diana. So for the next 10 to 15 minutes or so, we'll dive into exploring that one specific tool, the Part A application tool that was just mentioned. So I'm going to take a moment to share my screen. So your patience, please, as we just make that transition. Make sure I have a lot of screens open, making sure I'm showing you the right one. So you should be able to see a screen now. Just can I get a head nod if you can see? Right, excellent. So we did it correctly. So this particular tool was developed last spring as a planning tool that's intended to support school teams that are applying to Innovation Pathways designation. And so it is arranged by guiding principle, and it lists each individual indicator that applicants are responsible for in addressing in their Part A application. So essentially, this can act as your checklist document to ensure that you sort of have all of the components, all of your ducks in a row that you'll need for the application. As Diana mentioned just a few minutes ago, it can be pulled out with your team when you're in planning meetings to check the box on sort of where you are with each individual indicator and requirement for the application. It can also serve as a tool to self-evaluate your readiness to apply. And so under each of the guiding principles, there's a table. So I'll scroll just a little bit so you can see this full table here. And sort of each indicator is listed individually to show you sort of what's necessary to address in the design of your Innovation Pathway program, and then subsequently your Part A application. So on the right-hand side, there's a place to track each of the indicators as not started, in progress, or complete. And then further, under each of the guiding principle sections, there's a place for you to reflect on tasks, action items, and any next steps that are related to that specific guiding principle. So I'll scroll down just to let you know, or to sort of show you the full document. So it looks kind of lengthy at first brush, but it's really designed to help you make sure that you haven't missed anything that's a necessary component in your planning and in your completion of the Part A application. So you'll see each of the 5 guiding principles there with the appropriate components next to each of the indicators underneath them. So it's also worth noting, as Diana did just a few moments ago, that there's a Part B application tool that exists, sort of the partner tool with this one. But for the purposes of today's workshop and with the upcoming October 30th deadline for Part A applications, we're only going to focus on this Part A application tool today. And so with that, we're going to send you, I'm sorry, I can't see the chat in my current screen, but we're going to send you the link to this particular document so you can open it up on your own screen and take a look. And we want to provide you with a little bit of time to skim the tool on your own. So we'll take just a few minutes for you to sort of skim the tool, think about your school and your Part A application. Sort of as you scan either individually on your own, or if you're in a room with other colleagues, you can do this together, sort of with your school's application and your school's vision for your innovation pathway in mind. After you've skimmed the document, self-rank in at least one of the guiding principles. So you'll review each indicator and then sort of make a note about whether it's not started, in progress, or complete. So we'll give you a few moments to do that. You can open up the document, review. We'll put a timer on the screen in just a moment. And then that way you'll see it'll give us about 5 minutes to do that. So take the time, we'll throw up the timer, and then we'll come back in just a few minutes to discuss sort of what you saw and sort of what came up for you as you were doing the self-reflection piece. We know this was a really short time to review, but thanks for taking the time to sort of quickly do that. And so sort of as you've had a chance to review and sort of self-rank, hopefully at least a few of the sections, sort of what came up for you? So what questions did this raise for you? Are there any particular sections that stood out as needing more work, or any criteria that you were particularly struggling with? So this is open to the group, so feel free to unmute yourself and sort of share what your sort of initial experience was as you looked at this tool.
And feel free to share in the chat as well.
Thanks, Jennifer. Yeah, feel free either in the chat or if you're more comfortable sort of unmuting and sharing with the group. We're practiced on our wait time, so I'll give you another minute to sort of think about that. Sort of like as you were going through, sort of what stood out to you? Is there a particular section that you said like, oh, we might need some more work here, or any particular criteria that you took a look at that you think you might either be struggling with? Or sort of on the flip side, is there something that stood out to you as like, gosh, we're in really good shape, sort of better shape than we thought, than I thought we were before we had sort of this tool to walk through?
I think that we've applied for the planning grant funds and that would fund a lot of the activities that we need to complete Part A. So it almost seems like it's running concurrent. So we have our local mass hire board, but we plan to use the funding to work with external partners, but the checklist is saying you need at least 2 additional ones besides mass hire. So it's difficult to get someone to commit to that without being able to spend, a great deal of time with them to explain, what it is exactly that we're trying to do. So I think that's probably one of the areas that, for me, was why I put it down as a priority area. And I think with the 54%, I think it's difficult to, line up external vendors while we're in the middle of teaching in the midst of a pandemic. When we applied for grant and funds that would pay for stipends to allow teachers to meet with external vendors to develop the program. So it's kind of like 2 tracks that are happening at the same time. And that's the difficulty with me. I mean, I have some good leads on people, but it's just difficult. That's my take from the tool. I've used the toolkit before in looking at, and that's the section that's most problematic for me.
Well, thanks for sharing that. Jennifer said this in the chat, but sort of one second. I really appreciate your perspective on then sharing that. And the planning grants will be announced soon. So keep an eye and an ear out for that. So those will be coming very shortly.
Also elevating that I see in the chat that Madeline Smola also added that a challenge in her case may be the 100 hours of internship at a workplace, given that they're in a rural location.
Sort of a quick plug that might be helpful there. We've done a couple of workshops and some web forums on remote work-based learning experiences and sort of highlighting some current practices that are happening and some tools that might be helpful. And so if you go to the Innovation Pathways Community of Practice website, there's lots of resources there that might be helpful in thinking about what opportunities can be done virtually or remotely. I mean, for all of us now, but I think sort of like traditionally when you're in a more rural area and the opportunities perhaps aren't as plentiful, those tools might be helpful to you.
Seeing more come up in the chat, Tanya Baez noted that trying to give equitable access to students when a lot of internship opportunities need students to go through a query can be very challenging. We also have Dennis, who added that their challenge is the time to plan and submit the application itself, given that this is a very chaotic year. That was actually a huge motivator behind why, believe it or not, the Part A application was going to be due next week, I think. So we did push it back. It is, I know, still very challenging, and we acknowledge that and hope that, you know, this is a marathon rather than a sprint. So by having this be a phased application process, we hope that that helps spread the work out a little bit throughout the year, where Part A is really around the design, and Part B, which is quite a bit later, is when the rubber meets the road a little bit more.
Great.
So,
oh, go ahead, Diana.
I was just gonna say, so I think, you know, there's still stuff coming up with chat. I think, Callie, I'll let you determine if we have time to answer any more, or if we should wait till our Q&A point later on today for folks to ask specific questions about some of the concerns they're citing.
Mm-hmm. Took the words out of my mouth. Absolutely. So I think sort of we'll give you a few minutes to sort of percolate on this as we move to our next section. But we also do have that Q&A at the latter half of our workshop this morning. So if there are things that come up, sort of jot them down either on a piece of paper or you know, on your screen so that we can attest to them or come back to them later in the morning. And so with that, so one last piece, someone asked, what's the website with the criteria and the toolkit document? We've just shared that website. So it'll bring you to sort of the main page of that website. And there's a drop down in the top right-hand corner. There's a specific page for the Innovation Pathways Toolkit. And so you'll see that there. And then sort of one more time, I'll share the direct link to this preliminary criteria application tool so that you have that direct link as well. And so with that, I will turn it over to Laura to bring us to our breakout discussions. So I appreciate your time in getting us sort of, or taking a look at this Part A application tool. We hope that it proves useful to you in your planning and compiling your applications. And so I'll share with Laura now, who has taken over screen sharing as we speak.
Great, thank you so much. So we are going to transition to breakout sessions in just a moment. So thank you for your responses earlier to our poll, asking what was really at the forefront of your mind. That's allowed us to really identify what the priority spaces are for these breakout conversations. So what I'm going to invite you to do now is, you'll see here on this screen that the 3 breakouts that we are going to have are equitable access, guided academic pathways, and effective partnerships. What we'd appreciate if you could do now is navigate back to where you could rename yourself and indicate in your name. You're welcome to maybe put it in parentheses or put a comma after your name, and then just put the number 1, 2, or 3 with which breakout space you'd prefer to be in. And as a reminder for how to navigate there, again, if you hover over your own image in this Zoom meeting, you'll see 3 dots, and if you click on that, you'll see an indication to rename, and you can do so there. Our breakout space is going to have about 20 minutes of time for discussion, and a member of this facilitating team will be there to support folks in the room moving through the process of the breakout space, which I'll share in just a minute. And I also want to do an invitation directly for any of our DESE, Mass Hire industry partners. We really welcome and encourage you to join these discussions as well. So go ahead and add in a number, and you're welcome to listen in. And of course, we invite you to contribute in those spaces if you have any thoughts as well. And finally, for this instruction around adding a number, if you are having any challenges figuring out how to do so, please feel free to indicate so in the chat, or you can use the participant button to raise your hand for us, and one of our team members will be sure to help you so that we can get you to the right breakout space. I want to remind us of the community agreements that Callie shared at the start of our time together today. This is a great opportunity to both refresh our memory about what the agreements are, and if you took Callie up on her invitation to think about one you maybe wanted to focus on today, just check in and ask yourself how you're doing with that community agreement. And if you'd like to continue to focus on one in particular moving into breakouts, that's great. And if you'd like to choose another, you're welcome to do so. So I'll leave this here for just a couple of moments for people to refresh their memory.
I do see a couple people are asking how to add the number. You can just add it to the chat if you can't figure out how to rename yourself.
Great, thank you, Diana.
I've got most of you assigned to breakouts, but the few of you who haven't renamed yourself, if you want to just add to the chat what you'd prefer, that would be great.
Thanks, Diana. So just to briefly share what will be happening in the breakout spaces, this is a rough agenda for how we'll encourage folks to use their time. So we'll start with about 10 minutes just to give a chance for everybody who shows up into that breakout space to both introduce who they are and also share a little bit about where they are in the process. So facilitators will sort of choose how to do that and how much time to sort of allocate per person, depending on how large our spaces get. The next chunk of time, the next 10 minutes, we're going to encourage everyone to review the reflection tool, which Callie spoke to before in talking about the toolkit. I can't see the chat as well right now in this moment, but I will ask if it's not already there, if one of my colleagues could add that reflection tool so folks can click to that in the breakout spaces. And then we'll finish with 10 minutes of just really open discussion about, you know, what you're seeing, what you're thinking about now. And in particular, we'd love to hear if there are any questions that are surfacing in the group about what's next, if you have technical questions about anything that we've discussed so far today, etc. And then we'll invite each of the groups to share out in a discussion afterwards, just so that you're aware of that. A couple breakout room sort of best practices. When we move to those breakout spaces, we invite you to unmute yourself. We would love if you're able to share your video. I know some of you are working in spaces where you do not have a webcam, and of course that's perfectly fine. We're really glad to have you. When we transition to breakouts, if you've not participated in something like this before, you will see a prompt come up on your screen inviting you to join the breakout space, and we just ask you to click that button that says join the breakout room. If for some reason you're not seeing a prompt, feel free to let us know in the chat. We can navigate you. Sometimes the invitation can collapse, so we can show you where to pull it up again. And just a final note, once again, that the reflection tool is available to you. It's been linked in our chat today. So I'm going to look to my colleague Diana for a moment and see if we have a head nod that we are ready for people to transition.
We are for most folks. If you don't get assigned a room now, it's because I didn't know which one you wanted, and I'll ask you before I'll put you in the right one. I think we're going to really just have two breakouts right now, one focused on guided academic pathways and one focused on effective partnerships. So you should all receive an invitation now if you've given me a preference. And if you didn't, I will get a chance to ask you.
Great. So go ahead and click that join button as it's popping up on your screen, and then we'll see everybody back in the full space access. Thank you.
Welcome back, everybody. And it's nice to see you all again. I hope everybody had a good breakout conversation within your smaller group. And thanks to my colleagues who are facilitating those conversations. We only have about, something in the range of 20 more minutes together. So I want to make sure that we have the opportunity to share out a little bit about anything critical that came up in your conversations, and also to ask any questions that came up that felt a little more technical that you wanted an answer to, or that the group might be able to support. So we'll be getting started with that in just a minute. To start from, it would be great if one of you from each of the breakout rooms could share with us one or two highlights of your conversation before we get to the questions portion. So is there someone in the group discussing guided academic pathways that could share out something about your conversation?
Go for it, Emily. I saw you unmute. You're on.
Oh, I was waiting. I was going to refill my coffee as we started talking. I think the overall sense was the work, it seems sort of overwhelming and daunting, and that, you know, given the priorities, it's hard to kind of pull people in right now in a lot of different learning models happening across districts. But yet people were also, well, to embrace your norms, and people are also excited and enthusiastic about kind of getting into the work and looking towards the design elements. It seems like a lot of people, maybe except for one, is still really in the early stages of planning and design, and are looking, you know, in terms of resources we were just discussing, sort of looking towards some districts or organizations that have been particularly effective or successful in designing and executing some of the programming. So looking, you know, for some examples, some exemplars, some course descriptions, that kind of thing, as helpful resources moving forward. But in general, people are excited about the design and being intentional to include, you know, I had mentioned sort of like some of the UDL elements, the cultural responsiveness, and also Jennifer Watkin had mentioned including some outside community members and organizations like from Mass Hire that could sit on the team. And so that was news to me because I'm new. So anyway, we're excited. That's kind of the gist from the group. Thanks.
Thank you so much for sharing.
Sure.
We'll have a chance for others to chime in a few minutes too, but I'm wondering if somebody from the group focused on effective partnerships can share out some of the highlights of your group's conversation.
Sure, this is Carrie, no problem. So we talked a little bit about like working through the virtual internship landscape and different things that are coming up as a result of employers not being able to reach out to students as much or host them at their sites. And just adult capacity in general, like with all the different things going on, how can a guidance counselor be exclusively for innovation pathways to be doing the SATs, developing course schedules, and then also making these employer partnerships, and that's a lot. And some people do actually have a designated IP coordinator, designated IP guidance counselor, but in most schools, like that's just not the case. So adult capacity issues. One of the Mass Hire Board people from there said that for innovation pathways, they're not interested in just being like a checked box on an application that, okay, you talk to us and you're applying for an innovation pathway. It's really to forge that relationship and have us help you with career development experiences and make employer partnerships. And that the time is really right to make and leverage these connections, which I think is wonderful. And and we're ready for the work, but it is work. And even though effective partnerships is 5th on that list, it really is one of the most important things. And that's why it's on the list at all. So we really have to take that into consideration. Close. End scene.
Thank you, Carrie. So I'm going to turn it over to Callie to kind of facilitate a little bit further into the conversation and also to begin to move towards getting some questions asked and hopefully answered.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Diana. So we sort of have time now for sort of an open Q&A. So we've got about 12-ish minutes or so to do that. And so what additional questions, whether they be technical or adaptive, were you left with in your group, or are you personally sort of left with as we sort of come to the close of our time here? So I'll note that Jennifer and Carrie from DESE are here, so it's a great time to get any of those sort of technical questions about innovation pathways overall or the application process, any of those answered. But we're also curious about sort of what are those sort of like adaptive or sort of bigger questions that you're sort of wrestling with or thinking about. Note if you have school-specific questions, sort of like something that's particular to your current context, you can email Jennifer. Her email address is here on the screen. But would love to sort of open it up to you all, either by putting your questions in the chat or by unmuting yourself and sort of opening up to the full group. Sort of like, what additional questions do you have that you either want to sort of crowdsource from the group here or that you'd like to ask from any of the facilitation team?
And while you're thinking about that, we actually have a pretty comprehensive FAQ on that Innovation Pathways Community of Practice site, and I'll put that specific URL in the chat.
Great, thank you, Jennifer. So I know in our small group discussion, we sort of got cut off. We weren't able to sort of get to everything that we wanted to talk about. So I'll sort of put our effective partnerships group sort of in the hot seat for a minute. But sort of like, what else as a group came up for you? What else were you thinking about as we were having our conversation around effective partnerships?
I'll go ahead and add in because I think I wanted to add a bit to what Heather Darby was saying, and Heather Darby brought up STEM, and as an industry partner, and especially an industry partner that's coming from the apparel industry and apparel and soft goods manufacturing. I understand from the network that I'm involved in Massachusetts that there's a very strong need for very specialized training. And there's some great resources on university and college campuses for labs and all these high technical kinds of new environments like innovation centers. So in one case up in the north at UMass Lowell, there's an amazing building there now that has 3 floors of advanced innovation. And speaking from an industry partner, we as a network are looking to help people develop into a career pathway that has the skill sets that will be needed for new advancements. New advancements in apparel could be wearable technology. We're entering a whole new world of a combination of different types of training. So one of the barriers has been that we don't have the trained available people right here in Massachusetts. So there's a lot of focus on the industry side to try to figure out how to help. So that's the exciting contribution today, is to see that we know it takes work to build the partnerships and make the bridges, but we have such an amazing wealth of technology and advancement in Massachusetts, as well as a great school system. So I'm just excited to see that the conversation's happening. And I understand and we all know there's so much on the plates of our public school systems, and our public school systems don't have the budget to have that kind of advanced technology. So between the campuses that we have for our corporations, the campuses that we have for higher level education, and so on, this idea of shared resources and guidance is definitely a conversation that's happening here. And it's just, I wanted to add on to that for Heather because of the mention of STEM. And I like to call it STEAM. So, we don't want to forget about art in this whole category. But so STEM or STEAM and all of these advancements, I know we've been thrown off track with COVID in a big way. but nonetheless, we did have a lot of momentum happening there. And so I'm just really excited to see everybody trying to build this system. Thank you.
Thank you, Adrian. I really appreciate that. And I think that really speaks to sort of one of the things that our Effective Partnerships group was talking about was sort of like, you don't have to do it alone, that these businesses are there and want to figure out how to partner. And so using Mass Hire and your local sort of workforce and industry partners to figure out like, what's the right match? Like, what can the school sort of take ownership of? What can the industry partners take ownership of? And they really, in many cases, want to be there to support and sort of need to figure out how to make that partnership work together. So I really appreciate you sharing that, Adrian. Thank you. Other sort of things you're thinking about, questions or sort of just comments you have about sort of discussion so far, or additional pieces that are on your mind as you're in the planning phases and getting ready for those Part A applications?
Can I ask a question?
Please do.
It's probably to Jennifer or someone at DESE. When I first got on the application and got on this website, I mean, this workshop today, I thought we were definitely going to be applying for 2 pathways. And now that because I spent my time on the partnerships breakout, and I'm realizing, although that in school we have woodworking, we have robotics, we have welding, so we have these things happening, but there's not a pathway, but we don't have the partnerships. Whereas in the new pathway, biomedical innovation, we have a CNA course, but we've been working with the hospital for a year. So do you think that because we have that industry partnership already, that we should be applying for designation in just one pathway and then work on the next one in another time? Or is it more advantageous for people to get both pathways done, or the application in one?
I think it's context specific, Madeline. Thank you for sharing that. If you feel like you're a little bit further down the road, so to speak, with having the partnership established for your healthcare pathway, like maybe go for that first. We will be continuing to offer the designations. There's no, end date in sight, so we're here for you when you're ready with that other one to apply. Like, we'll support you. Yeah, but it's totally up to you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And feel free to give us a call and we can chat about it further.
And I would just add that we've seen from our existing designees, we've seen some that sort of go all in and sort of apply for multiple designations all at once because they feel like they have the infrastructure to do that. We have others who sort of start with one, build that out, then apply for a second designation. I think it's really dependent on local context. And, as we talked about earlier, sort of adult capacity, partnerships, all of those pieces being in place. And so the sort of what you apply for and when is really, as Jennifer just said, context specific and sort of what works for you in your school community and your community sort of writ large.
I would also add that it's not always easier to retrofit a pathway design to an existing sort of unofficial pathway in your school. So it might make sense to concentrate on one, because even though it sounds like your school has a lot of those pieces in place for various pathways, that doesn't necessarily always match up exactly to the requirements for pathways designation. And it's sometimes really helpful when you're sort of matching existing programming to this kind of new projected designation, to really concentrate on making sure everything is lined up for those.
It's a great point, Diana. And that's actually on a prior webinar, the question had come up, what are some of the biggest challenges that aspiring designees, as I like to call you, face in completing the Part A application? And I had said probably sector alignment, but I would say that for those of you who have academies or existing pathways that don't quite line up neatly with the 5 preordained industry sectors, it can be a challenge. And certainly I would underscore we're here to help you with that, but I would say take that. You guys are going through a lot right now, and I would say don't overcomplicate things maybe for yourselves. Give yourself some grace. That would be my other, bit of advice.
Thank you, Jennifer. to want to make sure, again, another call for questions that you have, this time really is dedicated for you all to either sort of ask questions of each other and sort of crowdsource. Again, one of the goals of any of our technical assistance events is to build a network and really have you all sort of rely on one another for some support and connection, to see what's happening across the schools and across districts. So questions you have for each other are welcome, just as questions you have for any of us are welcome.
And
I
for
know,
those,
I understand why you would not want to put out like an application as an exemplar and say this was one that got, you know, the designation because you want each school to be a, but I think it would be helpful if we knew of, like, say, this was a really good partnership that has been established between school X in this industry, and these are the components of it, and this is what they had, you know, like this was their infrastructure within the company and the infrastructure within their school. So if it was a large school, like Carrie had said before, they might have an IP coordinator, you know, with a large company. But if it's a smaller school, it would just be good to see how someone else made it work, how they designed their scope and sequence. And again, I know that Desi would be loath to say, well, here's a good application, because you would just get a copycat where people would just change words and stuff, and it wouldn't reflect what we're doing here. But, you know, if I was in our planning grant, we had money to like go visit. So if we knew of a similar sized school that had developed effective partnership, that would be someplace where we would go and visit and see what they did, you know, that type of stuff. So if there were, you know, similar, Desi has, you know, videos or things around academic excellence. This was a school that went from this level to this level, and these are some of the practices. If there was a similar kind of thing, because you've had these innovation pathways for a while, it was almost like categories of exemplar relationships between a school and an industry, rather than like, here was the grant that they wrote and this is why it was a good grant. Like this was a good partnership with this particular industry, because not every, you know, this was a good manufacturing partnership. This was a good healthcare. This was, you know, a good something else partnership. I think that would be helpful so that people could reach out, you know, and just say, hey, what did you do and what were your challenges and things like that.
So one thing I can share right now, so actually there's a few things I can share. One is that in the chat, there's actually a couple of links that Jennifer and Carrie just added that may be useful, where you can actually see a list of current designees in their sectors to at least begin to think about who may be somebody to reach out to. In terms of exemplars, a couple of things to note. One is that if you go to our technical assistance website, we have links to past webinars and events, and among them, there's some information about past site visits to strong programs, and there are speakers from the school level and the partner level who can speak to some exemplar programs that we've identified in the past, who came and spoke for some of our events about what's working in their respective sites and partnerships. Another thing is that this year we can't do live in-person site visits, at least for right now. But we are going to be offering program spotlights throughout this year at a few points. They won't be in time for the Part A application, but we are going to have one in November that could at least give you some thinking in between the Part A and the Part B about some practices that are working really well in a particular site. So we'll have more information about that specific event pretty soon.
thank you, Diana. And I would just add that, you know, this Innovation Pathways is actually still fairly new. You guys would be the 4th cohort, so we're still trying to surface what the exemplars are. We certainly are willing to, you know, to put out materials for you to look at, but yeah, we're still looking for those bright, shiny gold stars.
Great, thank you. Thank you all for your questions. In the interest of time, I'm going to move us on, but it's sort of worth noting, sort of as a closing thought, that there will be virtual professional learning communities this fall for new applicants, so for all of you, and you'll hear more about those in just a minute. We'll talk more specifically, but those spaces will also be a place to explore technical and adaptive questions sort of as they come up for you in your design and planning processes. And so if you're interested in sort of being part of a multi-school, multi-district community of practice, and to professional learning community, that opportunity will be available to you this fall. So thank you so much for your questions and for your active participation in our small groups. So with that, we'll do some sort of quick debriefing. So would love to know if you could share in the chat for how today went for you. So if you could share either in the chat, or again, you can unmute and share with the full group. So a glow and a grow. So what is something in terms of a glow that was really impressive to you, an idea that you heard or something that really excited you today? And then a grow are ideas that sort of make you think or raise additional questions for you and things you're continuing to wonder about. So we'd love to hear both the glows and the grows from our short time together this morning. So feel free to put those in the chat, or you can unmute and sort of share verbally with the group. So I'm assuming the silence means you're all typing away what your glows and grows are. So we'll have you keep going in the chat there and sort of we'll keep an eye on that chat as we go through. Thanks so much to the Carver team. See the self-assessment tool helpful, sort of continuing to think about your work on partnerships within your region. That's great. Thanks so much for sharing that. And so continue to put those in the chat as we wrap up in our last few slides here. So again, we have the link to our Innovation Pathways Community of Practice webpage. So this link will sort of be your go-to for all of the event registration, any of the tools and resources, any of the events from the past events. We have all of that there, and so feel free to explore that website a bit and see what's there. And certainly sort of you won't everything in our resources you won't use sort of A to Z, but thinking about what's applicable to you in a time when you need it. And we have organized, particularly within the toolkit, those resources for you to be able to go in and say like, oh, I really need something, connected to building mentor relationships. And you'll see, you can go right to that particular component and sort of see some resources related to that specific need. And so hopefully that's a tool that's helpful to you as you're sort of progressing in your design and as you're getting ready for your Part A applications. Next slide, please. So just a reminder and a reference that this fall, the October 30th, not September 30th, will be the Part A applications. Those will be due. And so the DESE team will review those applications and let folks know who's ready to move on for the Part B designation. And so those Part B applications will be due in winter. Jennifer, can you remind me of that specific date for the Part B applications?
I believe it's February the 15th. Let me just double check. Okay. It's a little bit later this year than last year. Yeah. Let's see, February 11th, Part B is due.
Thank you.
Sure.
Another date to keep in mind, that February 11th piece. And then shortly after those Part B applications have come in, you'll be notified of designation status in the spring. And then those that are awarded designation will begin their pathway programs officially in the fall of 2021. So that's a scope and sort of timeline we're working with this year. We'll be offering lots of different TA opportunities, technical assistance opportunities throughout the year. And to hopefully help you sort of as you're building those applications, and as you, as Jennifer noted, you're all aspiring Innovation Pathways designees. Sort of hopefully we all get those designations and then can help you support as you're building to the final finish line for next fall. I do see, let's see, someone has a hand raised. So before
the Carver team,
go ahead.
Thank you. Sorry, I was just wondering, and I apologize if you covered this in a breakout room. Do you know when MyCap, if our guidance team started the MyCap training last year, but then it was thwarted by COVID, if there's a plan to catch up on the last two MyCap trainings?
That's a great question. Meredith, I will connect with Lisa Harney, who is our point person on MyCap. Thank you for raising that. And just MyCap generally, for those of you who have not yet done the trainings, we certainly want to encourage you to do those this year. MyCap is a required component for Innovation Pathways. I definitely know who has done the trainings and who has not, so we'll make sure that you get spots in those trainings this year. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much for that question. So important dates and event reminders. So as we mentioned, the sign up for the PLCs is still open. And so we're hoping that sort of mid to late October, we can kick off those PLCs, but they'll meet sort of regularly every about 6 to 8 weeks or so to provide sort of an informal place for you all to connect, ask questions with each other, and sort of go through sort of some problem solving on design pieces and share. So you can sign up for that. The link that's on the screen here, I believe, was also shared in the chat, but we'll make sure to follow up with you so you have that. So if you're interested in joining a PLC, that's certainly available to you. Again, we've said this date a bunch, but October 30th, the Part A applications are due. At the beginning of November, sort of before this webinar, we'll have a program spotlight that we talked about. So we'll highlight some of the mass hire partnerships with some local schools to talk about what those partnerships look like, how they were developed, how they're continuing to grow. And so keep an eye out for that. The date and the time for that will be announced very shortly. Towards the end of November, just before the Thanksgiving holiday, we have another webinar on supporting special populations. And so thinking about how we best support, particularly our students with disabilities and English language learners in work-based learning opportunities. So what does that, could that extra support look like, and what does it take to really make sure that those populations are well supported? And then as we come into the new year, on January 13th, that will be our next Design Institute workshop, where we'll talk about equity and innovation pathways. So keep an eye out for registration for all of those events. The registration link, again, can be found at our Community of Practice page. We also have the link directly here to our Innovation Pathways FAQ guide. We continue to add to that FAQ all the time. And so if you have questions, check there first. It's likely that that question is already sort of listed there. And so you can check to see if the question is listed and answered there. If not, any of us are always available to answer questions for you as they come up. Next slide, please. And then sort of as we always do, we would love for you to take a moment to fill out the survey from today. The survey link is in the chat box and here on your screen. We really do read each and every comment that comes through on these surveys to know how to best serve you and best prepare for each of our technical assistance events. So please let us know how it went for you. We encourage you, even if you can't complete it right now, to open up that browser, to keep the window open, to be able to complete that at some point today or sort of in the next 48 hours, because that's the information we use to develop each of our technical assistance events and to know how to best support you. It should take 2 to 3 minutes to complete, so not long at all. So I encourage you to open up that link, and if you can't complete it right now, please be sure to do that sort of by the end of the day today. It'll be really helpful to us, and hopefully makes the future events the most useful for you and for your time. And so with that, I believe our next slide is a wrap-up slide. So really thank you so much for your engagement today. We appreciate you being here. Again, we know that things are difficult and time is a precious commodity, and so we appreciate you taking the time to be here with us this morning. If you have any additional questions after today or questions as they come up, feel free to be in touch with any of us. For the CCE team, our email addresses are listed on the screen here. The Innovation Pathways Community of Practice website is listed here. And then our colleagues at DESE are also always available. Jennifer has put her email again in the chat box. So thank you all so much for your time this morning. We really appreciate it. And we hope to see you very soon. Thanks so much, everyone.